Urartu, corresponding to the biblical kingdom of Ararat or kingdom of Van, was an Iron Age kingdom centered on Lake Van in the Armenian highlands. Strictly speaking, Urartu is the Assyrian term for a geographical region, while Kingdom of Urartu, or Bianili lands, are terms used in modern historiography for the Urartian-speaking Iron Age state that arose in that region. This language appears in inscriptions, though there is no written evidence of any other language being spoken in this kingdom. It is argued on linguistic evidence that Proto-Armenian came in contact with Urartian at an early date. That a distinction should be made between the geographical and the political entity was already pointed out by Kunug. The landscape corresponds to the mountainous plateau between Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, the Iranian Plateau, and the Caucasus Mountains, later known as the Armenian Highlands. The kingdom rose to power in the mid-9th century BC, but was conquered by Media in the early 6th century BC. The heirs of Urartu are the Armenians and their successive kingdoms. Name. The name Urartu comes from Assyrian sources. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser I recorded a campaign in which he subdued the entire territory of Urartu. The Shalmaneser text uses the name Urartu to refer to a geographical region, not a kingdom, and names 8 lands contained within Urartu. Urartu is cognate with the biblical Ararat, Akkadian Urartu, and Armenian Arat. The name used by the local population as a toponym was Bianili, which forms the root of the Armenian. Hence the names Kingdom of Van, or Vanik Kingdom. Scholars such as Carl Ferdinand Friedrich Lehmann Haupt believe that the people of Urartu called themselves Kildini after their god Kaldi. Boris Piotrovsky wrote that the Urartians first appear in history in the 13th century BC, as a league of tribes or countries which did not yet constitute a unitary state. Scholars believe that Urartu is an Akkadian variation of Ararat of the Old Testament. Indeed, Mount Ararat is located in ancient Urartian territory, approximately 120 kilometers north of its former capital. In addition to referring to the famous biblical mountain, Ararat also appears as the name of a kingdom in Jeremiah chapter 51 verse 27, mentioned together with Mini and Ashkenaz. In the early 6th century BC, the Urartian kingdom was replaced by the Armenian Urartu dynasty. In the trilingual Behistun inscription, carved in 521 or 520 BC by the order of Darius the Great of Persia, the country referred to as Urartu in Assyrian is called Armenia in Old Persian and Hamenuia in Elamite. Shibria was part of the Urartu Confederation. Later, there is reference to a district in the area called Armor, which some scholars have linked to the name Armenia. Geography. Urartu comprised an area of approximately 200,000 square miles, extending from the river Kura in the north to the northern foothills of the Taurus Mountains in the south, and from the Euphrates in the west to the Caspian Sea in the east. At its apogee, Urartu stretched from the borders of northern Mesopotamia to the southern Caucasus, including present-day Armenia and southern Georgia as far as the river Karath. Archaeological sites within its boundaries include Altin Tepe, Toprakala, Patnos and Haykabid. Urartu fortresses included Erebani, Van Fortress, Argashtihinili, Antiv, Haykabid, and Barskale, as well as Taishi, Bayini and others. Discovery. Inspired by the writings of the medieval Armenian historian Moses Khorenatsi, the French scholar Jean Saint-Martin suggested that his government send Friedrich Eduard Schultz, a German professor, to the Van area in 1827 on behalf of the French Oriental Society. Schultz discovered and copied numerous cuneiform inscriptions, partly in Assyrian and partly in a hitherto unknown language. Schultz also rediscovered the Kelashan stela, bearing an Assyrian-Urartian bilingual inscription, located on the Kelashan Pass on the current Iraqi-Iranian border. A summary account of his initial discoveries was published in 1828. Schultz and 4 of his servants were murdered by Kurds in 1829 near Barskale. His notes were later recovered and published in Paris in 1840. In 1828, the British Assyriologist Henry Creswick Rawlinson had attempted to copy the inscription on the Kellerschen stela, but failed because of the ice on the stel's front side. The German scholar R. Roche made a similar attempt a few years later, but he and his party were attacked and killed. In the late 1840s, Sir Austin Henry Layard examined and described the Urartian rock-cut tombs of Van Castle, including the Argostite chamber. From the 1870s, local residents began to plunder the Toprakala ruins, selling its artifacts to European collections. In the 1880s, this site underwent a poorly executed excavation organized by Hormuz Rassam on behalf of the British Museum. Almost nothing was properly documented. The first systematic collection of Urartian inscriptions, and thus the beginning of Uratology as a specialized field, dates to the 1870s, with the campaign of Sir Archibald Henry Sayce. The German engineer Karl Sester, discoverer of Mount Nemrut, collected more inscriptions in 1890 over one. Valdemar Belk visited the area in 1891, discovering the Rusa stela. A further expedition planned for 1893 was prevented by Turkish-Armenian hostilities. Belk, together with Lehmann Haut, visited the area again in 1898, excavating Toprakala. On this expedition, Belk reached the Kellerschen stela, but he was attacked by Kurds and barely escaped with his life. Belk and Lehmann Haut reached the stela again in a second attempt, but were again prevented from copying the inscription by weather conditions. After another assault on Belk provoked the diplomatic intervention of Wilhelm II, Sultan Abdul Hamid II agreed to pay Belk a sum of 80,000 gold marks in reparation. During World War I, the Lake Van region briefly fell under Russian control. In 1916, the Russian scholars Nikolai Yakovlevich Mar and Yosef Abgarovich Orbeli, excavating at the Van fortress, uncovered a four-faced stela carrying the annals of Urartu. In 1939, Boris Borisovich Pyatrovsky excavated Kamirbla, discovering Tasbeh, the city of the god of war, Tspar. In 1938–40, excavations by the American scholars Kersop and Silver Lake were cut short by World War II, and most of their finds and field records were lost when a German submarine torpedoed their ship, the SS Athenia. Their surviving documents were published by Manfred Kaufmann in 1977. A new phase of excavations began after the war. Excavations were at first restricted to Soviet Armenia. The fortress of Kamirbla, dating from the reign of Rusa II, was excavated by a team headed by Boris Pyatrovsky. And for the first time the excavators of a Urartian site published their findings systematically. Beginning in 1956, Charles A. Burney identified and sketch-surveyed many Urartian sites in the Lake Van area, and from 1959, a Turkish expedition under Tarzan Özgürk excavated Altın Tepe and Arov Erzen. In the late 1960s, Urartian sites in northwest Iran were excavated. In 1976, an Italian team led by Mio Salvini finally reached the Kellerschen stela, accompanied by a heavy military escort. The Gulf War then closed these sites to archaeological research. Ogdebeli resumed excavation of Urartian sites on Turkish territory. In 1989, Ioannis, a 7th century BC fortress built by Rusas II of Urartu, was discovered 35 kilometers north of Van. In spite of excavations, only a third to a half of the 300 known Urartian sites in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Armenia have been examined by archaeologists. Without protection, many sites have been plundered by local residents searching for treasure and other saleable antiquities. History. Origins. Assyrian inscriptions of Shalmaneser. I first mention Urartu as one of the states of Neri. a loose confederation of small kingdoms and tribal states in the Armenian highland in the 13th to 11th centuries BC, which he conquered. Urartu itself was in the region around Lake Van. The Neri states were repeatedly subjected to further attacks and invasions by the Assyrians, especially under Tukulti-Ninurta, Tiglath-Pileser, Ashur-bel-Kala, Adad-Nirari II, Tukulti-Ninurta II, and Ashur-nazir-Ipal II. Urartu re-emerged in Assyrian inscriptions in the 9th century BC as a powerful northern rival of Assyria. The Neri states and tribes became a unified kingdom under King Aramu, whose capital at Arzashkun was captured by the Assyrians under Shalmaneser III. Roughly contemporaries of the Urartu, living just to the west along the southern shore of the Black Sea, were the Kafkas, known from Hittite sources. Growth. The temporary eclipse of Assyria in the first half of the 8th century BC had helped Urartu's growth, as it became the largest and most powerful state in the Near East, which was accomplished in little time. Saduri I, son of King Aramu, successfully resisted the Assyrian attacks from the south, led by Shalmaneser III, consolidated the military power of the state and moved the capital to Tushpa. His son, Ispuini, annexed the neighboring state of Musazir and made his son Saduri II viceroy. Musazir later became an important religious center of the Urartian kingdom. Ispuini was in turn attacked by Shamshi-Adad V. His successor Menhur also enlarged the kingdom greatly and left inscriptions over a wide area. Urartu reached the highest point of its military might under Menhu's son Argishti I, becoming one of the most powerful kingdoms of ancient Near East. Argishti I added more territories along the Araxes River and Lake Sevan, and frustrated Shalmaneser IV's campaigns against him. Argishti also founded several new cities, most notably Erebani in 782 BC. 6,600 captured slaves worked on the construction of the new city. At its height, the Urartu kingdom may have stretched north beyond the Aras River and Lake Sevan, encompassing present-day Armenia and even the southern part of Georgia almost to the shores of the Black Sea, west to the sources of the Euphrates, east to present-day Tabriz, Lake Urmia, and beyond, and south to the sources of the Tigris. Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria conquered Urartu in the first year of his reign. There the Assyrians found horsemen and horses, tamed as colts for riding, that were unequaled in the south, where they were harnessed to Assyrian war chariots. Decline and recuperation. In 714 BC, the Urartu kingdom suffered heavily from Cimmerian raids and the campaigns of Sargon II. The main temple at Mushashir was sacked, and the Urartian king Ruso I was crushingly defeated by Sargon II at Lake Urmia. He subsequently committed suicide in shame. Ruza's son Argishti II restored Urartu's position against the Cimmerians. However, it was no longer a threat to Assyria and peace was made with the new king of Assyria Sennacherib in 705 BC. This in turn helped Urartu enter a long period of development and prosperity, which continued through the reign of Argishti's son Rusa II. After Rusa II, however, the Urartu grew weaker under constant attacks from Cimmerian and Scythian invaders. As a result, it became dependent on Assyria, as evidenced by Rusa I's son Sada III referring to the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal as his father. Fall. According to Urartian epigraphy, Saduri III was followed by three kings: Erimena, his son Rusa III, and the latter's son Rusa IV. Late during the 7th century BC, Urartu was invaded by Scythians and their allies, the Medes. In 612 BC, the Median king Cyaxares the Great, together with Nabopolassar of Babylon and the Scythians, conquered Assyria after it had been badly weakened by civil war. The Medes then took over the Urartian capital of Van towards 585 BC, effectively ending the sovereignty of Urartu. According to the Armenian tradition, the Medes helped the Armenians establish the Urartu dynasty. Many Urartian ruins of the period show evidence of destruction by fire. This would indicate two scenarios: either Media subsequently conquered Urartu, bringing about its subsequent demise, or Urartu maintained its independence and power, going through a mere dynastic change, as a local Armenian dynasty overthrew the ruling family with the help of the Median army. Ancient sources support the latter version. Xenophon, for example, states that Armenia, ruled by an Urartu king, was not conquered until the reign of Median king Astyages, long after Median invasion of the late 7th century BC. Similarly, Strabo wrote that in ancient times Greater Armenia ruled the whole of Asia, after it broke up the empire of the Syrians, but later, in the time of Astyages, it was deprived of that great authority. Medieval Armenian chronicles corroborate the Greek and Hebrew sources. In particular, Moses Korenatsi writes that Armenian prince Paruiskayodi helped the Median king Cyaxares and his allies conquer Assyria, for which Cyaxares recognized him as the king of Armenia, while Media conquered Armenia only much later, under Astyages. It is possible that the last Urartian king, Rusariv, had connections to the future incoming Armenian Urartids dynasty. Urartu was destroyed in either 590 BC or 585 BC. By the late 6th century, Urartu had certainly been replaced by Armenia. Legacy: little is known of what happened to the region of Urartu under the foreign rule following its fall. The most widely accepted theory is that settlers related to Phrygians, or more specifically tribes speaking a Proto-Armenian language conventionally named Armeno-Phrygians, who had already settled in the western parts of the region prior to the establishment of Urartu, had become the ruling elite under the Medes, followed by the Achaemenid Persians. These Armeno-Phrygians, referred to as Armenians as of now, would have mingled with the disparate peoples of Urartu, resulting a fusion of languages and cultures. The Armenians multiplied in numbers and spread their language throughout the territory of Urartu. The Urartians, during its dominance, had amalgamated disparate tribes, each of which had its own culture and traditions. Thus, when the political structure was destroyed, little remained that could be identified as one unified Urartian culture. The region formerly known as Urartu became an Achaemenid satrapy called Armenia, which later became an independent kingdom called Armenia. The Urartians who were in the satrapy were then assimilated, becoming part of the Armenian ethnogenesis. However, other Urartians might have kept their former identity. According to Herodotus, the Alarodians, believed to be Urartian remnants, were part of the 18th satrapy of the Achaemenid Empire and formed a special contingent in the Grand Army of Xerxes I. Some Urartian traditions, such as architecture and dam constructions, were absorbed in the following Persianates, and most probably persisted in the satrapy of Armenia. Urartu did not give birth to a direct successor, however. The satrapy of Armenia, as an entity which emerged immediately after its fall, inherited its cultural, traditional, geographical and some linguistic aspects. Darius I the Great, in his famous Behistun inscription, calls the region Armenia, Armenia in Old Persian, and Urartu in Babylonian, clearly equating the two, suggesting that both are somewhat part of a same continuous entity. As the Armenian identity developed in the region, the memory of Urartu faded and finally disappeared. The language spoken in Urartu is now extinct. Little is known of what was spoken in the geopolitical region from the time of Urartu's fall in the 6th century BC, to the creation of the Armenian alphabet in the 4th century AD. In ancient Persian inscriptions, references to Armenia indicate that Urartian was still spoken, or was in a transitional period into being replaced with the Armenian language. In fact, the ethnonym Armenia itself and all other names attested with reference to the rebellions against Darius in Armenia are not connected with Armenian. Linguistic and onomastic material attested later in native Armenian sources. They are also not Iranian, but seem related to Urartian. The name of the province of Urartu in the Kingdom of Armenia is believed to be a continuum of the Urartu toponym. The modern name of Mount Ararat is derived from the biblical mountains of Ararat, and the Ararat province of modern Armenia is in turn named after the mountain. Economy and politics. The economic structure of Urartu was similar to other states of the ancient world, especially to Assyria. The state was heavily dependent on agriculture, which required a centralized effort to irrigation. These works, managed by kings, in their implementation participated the free inhabitants, and perhaps the prisoners as slaves. Royal governors, influent people and, perhaps, free peoples had their own allotments. Individual territories within the state had to pay taxes, the central government grain, horses, bulls, etc. In peacetime, Urartu probably led an active trade with Assyria, providing cattle, horses, iron and wine. According to archaeological data, farming on the territory of Urartu began to develop since the Neolithic period, even in the 3rd millennium BC. In the Urartian age, agriculture was well developed and closely related to the Assyrian on the selection of cultures and methods of processing. From cuneiform sources, it is known that in Urartu grew wheat, barley, sesame, millet, and emmer, and cultivated gardens and vineyards. Many regions of the Urartu state required artificial irrigation, which has successfully been organized by the rulers of Urartu in the heyday of the state. In several regions remain ancient irrigation canals, constructed by Urartu, mainly during the Argashtian Menua period, some of which are still used for irrigation.